Some may call Identity 5 a chip off the old Dead by Daylight block, but which one became the most competitive? Let's begin. Let's start by comparing characters in both games. In Identity 5, each survivor has unique abilities and traits that make them different from each other. In Dead by Daylight, however, all survivors are essentially the same, except for their unique perks that can be shared to other survivors after reaching a certain level. This means that in DBD, the killer, or hunter I guess, has less information about the survivor's capabilities and roles, and each match can be more unpredictable and varied. In IDV, on the other hand, the hunter can easily identify the survivor's abilities and roles by their appearance and plan accordingly. This makes Identity 5 more competitive in this aspect, as there is less randomness and more strategy involved. Next up, let's look at the persona web or perk system in both games. These are the way that survivors and killers or hunters can customize their skills and abilities to suit their playstyle. In Dead by Daylight, there are lots of perks for you to choose from, some of which are more useful than others, and some of which are more like meme perks, I guess. For example, there is a perk called naib that makes you start the game injured and unable to heal, which is considered to be playing DBD on hard mode. In Identity 5, there are fewer options for you to choose from, but they are more balanced overall and a lot less fun, sadly. In IDV, most players tend to use a combination of the two final traits from the persona web, such as knee jerk, tide turner, flywheel, or borrowed time. These traits have a significant impact on the game and are almost essential for any character, especially in the case of borrowed time that 99.9% of players have in their persona web tree. The fact that Identity 5 has no meme traits and that most players use similar builds makes it more competitive in this category as well. Next, let's talk about the maps in both games. This is arguably one of the most important factors that affects the gameplay and outcome of each match. Dead by Daylight has a lot more maps than Identity 5, with over 20 realms and multiple variations of each map within each realm. This makes each match more diverse and exciting, but also more challenging for both sides as they have to adapt to different environments and situations. Identity 5 has fewer maps, but they are more consistent and fixed. The palettes, the windows, and other elements are always in the same place on each map, so both sides can learn them by heart and use them to their advantage. In the case of Dead by Daylight, all areas are essentially randomized with their so-called tile system. This system could lead to maps spawning dead kiting areas one match with no pallets, and the next match being a pallet buffet with back-to-back crazy strong kiting areas. This makes Identity 5 more competitive in this category as well, as there is less RNG involved and more strategizing options for you to choose from. Another aspect that affects the maps is the cipher machine and dungeon location system of Identity 5. This is somewhat randomized, but not as much as Dead by Daylight's map system. There are fixed groups of spawn locations for cipher machines and for dungeons that players can memorize. In contrast, we have DBD, where there is a similar system for generator spawns, but dungeon locations are completely randomized, although some areas do have a higher chance of spawning one, such as Shack. From a competitive standpoint, consistency is key, so I think that Identity 5 wins this category once again. The next aspect is the spawns of survivors and killers, or hunters in the case of Identity 5. DBD has a random spawn system where players usually spawn away from the killer, but this can vary depending on each match and the offerings used by both sides. Identity 5 has a more consistent and strategic spawn system where survivors can choose their spawn location when they're above mid-tier with the spawn selection feature, and the hunter can then see the location of those survivors and choose their own placement accordingly. This leads to a lot of back and forth gameplay and planning, and I personally think this is one of the most competitive features that Identity 5 has over DBD. We do have to give some credit to DBD though, as both sides can use offerings to influence the map selection or the survivor grouping, which can give them some advantage in some cases, but also can give them a disadvantage. However, this can also be incredibly unfair for the other side, as they are not aware of these offerings until the match starts. Overall, I think that IDV wins this category. Wow, again. The final aspect, or the final category, is the game balance and playstyle of both games. This is a very difficult category for me to be able to compare, as both games have different approaches and goals for their gameplay and design. Identity 5 has a ban system in rank modes where hunters can ban 1 or 2 survivors from being played depending on their tier, and survivors can then ban 1 hunter. This is a very competitive feature that you see in other games that allows both sides to eliminate some threats or counter picks before the match even starts. Dead by Daylight, on the other hand, does not have this feature, but it does have more transparency and statistics about the game balance and performance of each character and perk. The DBD developers aim for killers to have around a 60% win rate, and they often reveal data about which characters are most played, which perks are most popular, and even more. They also update and balance the game more frequently than they did before to keep it fresh and fair for both sides. I must say that IDV does that even more often than DBD does though. Each game has a different playstyle and metagame that depends on their mechanics and balance. For example, camping a rocket chair in Identity V is a common and viable strategy in the game, and the game is balanced around that. In Dead by Daylight, camping a hook is considered to be a bad strategy, and they've even added a feature to stop people from doing that. Both games have their own strengths and weaknesses in terms of balance and playstyle, so I think this category will be a tie for now. Regardless of who won in that last category, we still have a solid answer as to which game is the more competitive, with Identity V winning essentially every category I have shown today. In my opinion, Identity V is so competitive that even the slightest mistake in a match can cost you the entire win, so watch this video here to learn about some of the mistakes that you might be making.